I don't know why I thought solo camping was a good idea. Maybe it was the need to get away from people, or maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that I could do it. Either way, I found myself deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest town, setting up camp as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was cool, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. I had picked a spot near a small creek, far off any main trail. The ground was soft but not too damp, and I spent a good amount of time making sure my tent was properly staked. Once everything was set up, I gathered some wood, started a small fire, and cooked a simple meal. It was peaceful. I was alone, and for the first few hours I was completely at ease. That changed around midnight. I woke up to a sound. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I lay still in my sleeping bag, I realized it was something moving outside. Something heavy. It wasn't just the random crack of a branch falling. It was deliberate, slow footsteps. My heart pounded in my chest. I reached for my flashlight but didn't turn it on. Instead, I stayed as still as possible, listening. The footsteps stopped. Then came the sound of breathing. Deep, steady breathing. It was close, maybe just a few feet away from my tent. Every muscle in my body locked up. My mind raced with possibilities. A bear? A cougar? Neither made sense. Cougars move silently, and bears make more noise. This sounded like a person. I gripped the handle of the small knife I had packed, but it felt useless. My gun was locked in my car, parked nearly a mile away. I cursed myself for leaving it behind. I told myself it was nothing, maybe an animal, maybe my imagination. But then I heard it again, slow, careful steps moving around my tent. Whoever it was, they were circling me. I stayed frozen. My tent zipper was closed, and I knew if I tried to open it, I'd make noise. I thought about calling for help, but my phone was off to conserve battery. If I turned it on, the screen would glow, giving away my exact location. My breath came in short, shallow bursts. I knew I had to do something, but I had no idea what. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, gripping my knife, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. When the first light of dawn crept through the trees, I slowly unzipped my tent and looked around. My fire was nothing but cold ash, my small pile of firewood untouched. The forest was completely still, but there were footprints, not boot prints, bare feet, and they were large. I packed up my gear as fast as I could, constantly looking over my shoulder. The feeling of being watched never left. My hands trembled as I stuffed my sleeping bag into my pack. I had never packed up so quickly in my life. I took down my tent in record time, not even bothering to fold it properly. The hike back to my car was the longest mile I have ever walked. Every rustling leaf, every snapping twig made my pulse spike. I kept expecting to see someone or something burst through the trees, but the woods remained quiet. When I finally reached my car, I didn't hesitate. I threw my pack into the back seat, started the engine, and sped out of there. I didn't relax until I was miles away, back on the highway, civilization in sight. I still don't know who or what was out there that night. Maybe it was just some hermit living off the grid, or maybe it was something worse. All I know is that I won't be camping alone again, ever. I don't even know why I agreed to go on this trip. I never liked the idea of being out in the woods overnight, but my friends insisted, said it would be good to get away from everything for a while. They had been planning a weekend camping trip for weeks, and I figured I'd go along just to get them off my back. We picked a spot deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest road. It was supposed to be secluded, quiet, untouched by crowds, just us and nature. We parked the car at the trailhead, packed up our gear, and hiked for nearly 2 hours before finally reaching the spot. It was perfect, at least that's what everyone else kept saying. A small clearing surrounded by thick trees, with just enough space for our tents and a fire pit. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional chirp of birds. It should have felt peaceful, but for some reason I felt uneasy the moment we arrived. I didn't say anything, though. I told myself I was just being paranoid. So I set up my tent with the others, gathered some firewood, and did my best to relax. We spent the evening cooking over the fire, drinking a little and swapping stories. The night stretched on, and eventually we crawled into our tents one by one. I tried to sleep, but I just couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Every sound outside made me flinch. The snap of a twig, the rustling of leaves. I told myself it was just animals, but I still couldn't sleep. Sometime after midnight, I finally drifted off, but it didn't last long. I woke up suddenly to the sound of movement outside my tent. At first, I thought it was one of my friends getting up to pee, but the footsteps were too heavy, too slow. I held my breath, listening. The steps circled our campsite, moving deliberately. Whoever or whatever it was, they weren't lost. They weren't just passing through. They were watching. I wanted to call out, but something told me to stay silent. Instead, I reached for the knife I had packed just in case. My fingers wrapped around the handle, but I didn't move. I just lay there, barely breathing, waiting. Then, just as suddenly as they came, the footsteps stopped. The forest was silent again. I told myself I imagined it. Maybe it was just an animal. Maybe I was just on edge for no reason. I forced myself to close my eyes, gripping the knife like a lifeline. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I fell asleep. Morning came, and everything felt normal again. The sun was shining. The birds were chirping. My friends were already up, making breakfast over the fire. No one mentioned anything strange. No one seemed worried. I wanted to ask if they had heard anything, but I didn't want to sound crazy, so I kept it to myself. The second night, I told myself I wouldn't let my imagination get the best of me. I would sleep through the night no matter what. But when darkness fell, the unease returned. I tried to ignore it, lying in my tent, eyes shut tight. But then, around the same time as the night before, I heard it again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, closer this time. I held my breath, waiting for them to stop, to fade away like before. But they didn't. They stopped right outside my tent. I gripped my knife so tight my hand hurt. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Then the sound of fabric rustling. My tent. Something or someone was touching my tent. I stayed frozen, barely breathing. And then the worst part, the zipper, started moving. Slowly, inch by inch, someone was opening my tent. Panic flooded my body, but I didn't make a sound. I was still gripping my knife, but my hands were shaking. The zipper moved lower. I could feel the air shift as the tent opened slightly. I had to do something. Now, I didn't think. I just moved. I shot up and lunged forward, slashing blindly with the knife. I felt resistance, something solid. A grunt, a shuffle of movement outside. Then silence. I didn't stop to think. I burst out of the tent, knife raised. But there was nothing there. Just the dark woods, silent and still. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I would pass out. I scanned the trees, expecting to see someone standing there, watching. But there was no one. The others woke up, startled by the noise. I told them what happened, and for the first time I saw fear in their faces. We searched the campsite, looking for any sign of someone being there. And then we found it. A single bloody handprint on the side of my tent. We packed up and left before the sun was up. We didn't talk much on the hike back to the car. No one wanted to say what we were all thinking, that we had been watched, that someone had been out there in the woods waiting. When we finally reached the car, I felt like I could breathe again. We drove back to town in silence. No one suggested camping again. I don't know who was out there that night. I don't know what they wanted. But I know one thing for sure. We weren't alone. I never liked camping. It wasn't that I was scared of the woods or being alone in the dark. I just preferred solid walls and a locked door between me and the outside world. But my brother, Jason, loved it. He'd been on my case for years, trying to convince me to go on one of his weekend trips. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of pestering, I gave in. We packed light, just a tent, a couple of sleeping bags, some food, and a few essentials. Jason had been camping dozens of times, so I figured he knew what he was doing. We drove out to a remote part of the state, far from any main roads, to a place he swore was the perfect spot. I wasn't thrilled about being so isolated, but I told myself I was being paranoid. The first day went fine. We set up camp near a small clearing surrounded by thick trees. Jason built a fire and we cooked some canned food. The air smelled fresh, crisp, and earthy. At night, the stars were brighter than I had ever seen, and the quiet was unsettling but oddly peaceful. I almost started to enjoy myself. Then, sometime around midnight, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. It was dead silent outside. No wind, no rustling leaves, nothing. Just complete, unnatural silence. I lay still, my heartbeat the only sound I could hear. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just overthinking. But something about the silence felt wrong. I turned over to check on Jason, but he was fast asleep, his heavy breathing steady. I forced myself to close my eyes and go back to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, Jason woke up before me and started preparing breakfast. I sat up, rubbing my eyes. The first thing I noticed was that the firewood we had stacked the night before was scattered. I figured maybe an animal had gotten into it. Jason didn't seem to care. "It happens," he said, shoving a piece of jerky into his mouth. We spent the day hiking. Nothing too extreme, just following some trails Jason had mapped out. Everything felt normal again. The sun was warm, the air fresh, and the unease from the night before started to fade. That night, after we turned in, I struggled to fall asleep. That same eerie silence had returned. No crickets, no wind, just nothing. I lay there, listening, waiting for something, anything, to break the quiet. Then, just as I was about to convince myself I was imagining things, I heard it, a faint crunch, like a footstep. I froze. My breathing went shallow. It was close, too close. I waited, straining to hear more. Another crunch, then another. Slow, deliberate. My mind raced, trying to come up with a logical explanation. An animal? No, animals don't move like that. A deer would be more erratic, lighter on its feet. This was something else. I turned my head slightly, trying to get a look at Jason, but he wasn't in his sleeping bag. Panic surged through me. I sat up too fast, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The tent was dark, but I could tell. It was empty. I swallowed hard. Maybe he just went to take a leak. Maybe he couldn't sleep and went for a short walk. I tried to keep myself calm, but the footsteps were still there. Closer now, right outside the tent. Then, silence again. I sat in the dark, waiting, every muscle in my body tense. I don't know how long I stayed like that. 5 minutes? 10? Then, in the distance, I heard something fast, moving through the trees, running. Jason. I shot up and scrambled out of the tent. The fire had died down, but the faint glow of embers lit up the clearing. Jason was nowhere to be seen. "Jason!" I called out, my voice hoarse. Nothing. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. A shadow darting between the trees. Not Jason. Too big. Too fast. I backed up toward the tent, my hands shaking. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I stood there, frozen, heart hammering in my chest. Then, Jason burst out from the treeline, running straight toward me. His face was pale, his eyes wild with fear. He didn't say anything. He just grabbed my arm and yanked me toward the tent. "Pack up," he rasped. "Now." I didn't ask questions. I moved on instinct, stuffing my sleeping bag, shoving things into my backpack. Jason kept looking over his shoulder, breathing hard. He had a long scratch down his arm, his shirt torn. "What happened?" I whispered. "Not now," he snapped. "Move." We packed up in record time. I grabbed my flashlight, but Jason slapped it out of my hand. "No lights," he hissed. "Just go." We left everything else behind, the firewood, the food, the tent. Jason led the way, moving fast but as quietly as possible. Every few steps, he glanced back. I wanted to ask, to demand an explanation, but his face told me everything I needed to know. Something had scared him, something real. We hiked back to the truck in complete silence. The whole time I felt watched. The darkness pressed in around us, thick and suffocating. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow looked like something waiting to pounce. It took an hour, maybe more, but we finally reached the truck. Jason all but shoved me inside before climbing into the driver's seat and gunning the engine. As we sped off, I risked one last glance out the window. I didn't see anything, but I felt it. Whatever was out there, it was still watching. We drove all night, not stopping until we were back in the city. Jason never explained what he saw, and I didn't press him. But we never went camping again, and I never will. I never liked camping much, but my friends always told me I needed to get out of my comfort zone. I wasn't a city guy, but I wasn't exactly a wilderness guy either. The idea of sleeping outside, exposed to the elements, never sat right with me. But when my coworker, Dan, invited me on a camping trip to a remote forest deep in northern Oregon, I decided to give it a shot. He said it was his favorite spot. Undisturbed, quiet, and surrounded by nothing but trees and the occasional deer. It was just the two of us. Dan had been camping all his life and knew his way around the wilderness, so I figured I'd be in safe hands. We left early on a Friday morning, his truck packed with gear, enough food for the weekend, and a couple of rifles just in case we ran into any trouble. Bears, Dan had said with a shrug when I asked why we needed them. I wasn't too keen on encountering a bear, but I nodded along. The drive took hours, first on the highway, then onto dirt roads that kicked up so much dust I could barely see out the windshield. The deeper we got, the fewer signs of human life there were. No houses, no gas stations, no cell service. Just an endless stretch of trees, their branches thick and tangled like a natural cage around us. By the time we reached the campsite, the sun was starting to set. We were in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. The ground was uneven, covered in dry leaves and twigs that snapped underfoot. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles. It felt isolated, like we were the only two people left in the world. We set up camp quickly, pitching our tents and building a fire. Dan made dinner, canned chili, and some grilled sausages. The food was hot and filling, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I chalked it up to being in an unfamiliar place. Maybe it was just nerves. That night, I barely slept. Every little noise sent my heart racing. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling. It was probably just the wind, or maybe an animal moving through the trees. But in the darkness, everything felt more sinister. I stayed zipped up in my sleeping bag, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. The next morning, I woke up to Dan already up and about, collecting firewood. "Sleep well?" he asked, grinning. I lied and said yes. We spent the day hiking through the forest, following trails Dan knew by heart. The deeper we went, the more unsettling the silence became. There were no birds chirping, no squirrels rustling in the underbrush, just the sound of our footsteps and the occasional gust of wind through the trees. Something about it felt wrong. That afternoon, as we made our way back to camp, we stumbled upon something that made my stomach drop. A deer carcass. It was fresh, maybe a few hours old. But what unsettled me the most was the way it had been killed. Its body was torn open, deep gashes across its sides, like it had been attacked by something big. Dan crouched down beside it, examining the wounds. "Cougar, maybe," he said, but he didn't sound convinced. I could tell he was trying to keep me calm, but I saw the way his jaw tightened. He wasn't sure what had done this. We hurried back to camp after that. The mood had shifted. I could tell Dan was uneasy now too, though he didn't say it outright. That night, we kept the fire burning longer than we normally would. The warmth should have been comforting, but all it did was make the shadows beyond it feel darker. I didn't sleep at all. Every little sound had me on edge. Around midnight, I heard something. Not just twigs snapping, but something heavier, slow, deliberate footsteps. They circled the perimeter of our camp. I held my breath, listening. Dan must have heard it too, because I saw him sit up in his tent, rifle in hand. Then silence. Nothing moved for what felt like hours. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I must have dozed off. When I woke up, the fire had died down to embers. Dan was already up, but his face was pale, his eyes scanning the treeline. "Something was out there last night," he muttered. He showed me the tracks leading just to the edge of our camp. They were deep, heavier than a person's. And then I saw it. Something hanging from a low branch near my tent. A strip of bloody deer hide. Something had put it there. We packed up fast. Neither of us said much. I don't know what was out there, and I don't want to. But as we drove away, leaving that place behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had been watched the entire time. I haven't been camping since. I always loved being alone in the woods. There's something about the quiet, about the way the world feels like it belongs only to you when you're deep in the trees, far away from roads and people. I never felt scared out there, not even at night. The forest was peaceful, predictable, until it wasn't. It was the first weekend of October, and I had planned a solo camping trip deep in the mountains. I had hiked this trail a few times before, but never gone as far as I planned to this time. I wanted to challenge myself to go deeper, farther, to find a place where I wouldn't see another soul for miles. That was the goal. That was the mistake. I started early in the morning, setting off from the trailhead with my backpack full of supplies. The air was cool, the ground damp from a rainstorm the night before, and the forest smelled like wet earth and pine. It was a good day for hiking. The first few hours were easy. I followed the main trail before branching off onto a lesser-used path, one that wasn't marked but was still visible if you knew where to look. It wasn't on any official map, but I had found it on an old hiker's forum. According to a few posts, it led to a hidden clearing near a small lake. Secluded. Perfect. I reached the clearing in the late afternoon. It was as beautiful as I had hoped. A small, flat space surrounded by towering trees, the lake stretching out just beyond the tree line. The water was still, reflecting the gray clouds above like glass. There was no sign that anyone had camped there in a long time. No fire pits, no trash, just untouched wilderness. I set up my tent near the edge of the clearing, close enough to the lake to hear the soft lapping of water, but far enough that I wouldn't wake up damp from the mist. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, I started a small fire and cooked a simple meal. Everything felt right. This was why I came out here, to sit by the fire, breathe in the fresh air, and let the weight of everyday life slip away. But then, sometime after dark, something changed. It was small at first, the kind of thing you'd ignore if you weren't paying attention. A sound, distant but sharp. A crack, like a branch snapping underfoot. I looked up from the fire, scanning the trees. Nothing. The forest was dark beyond the reach of the flames, just an endless stretch of blackness. I listened, holding my breath. Silence. I shook it off. Probably an animal. A deer, maybe, or a raccoon. Nothing to worry about. But still, I felt uneasy. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I wasn't used to being this deep in the woods alone at night. I added more wood to the fire and tried to relax. I forced myself to eat, to focus on the warmth of the flames. But then it happened again. Another sound, closer this time. Not a branch breaking, a rustling, like something moving through the underbrush. I turned my head sharply, eyes locked on the darkness beyond the trees. My heart was pounding now. I wanted to believe it was an animal, but something about it felt wrong. It wasn't the sound itself, but the way it stopped as soon as I looked. Like whatever was out there was watching me. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the noise. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees in harsh white light. Nothing moved. The forest was still. Too still. I stayed like that for a long time, scanning the woods, waiting. My fire crackled behind me, the only sound in the night. Eventually, I convinced myself it was just my nerves. I turned off the flashlight, took a deep breath, and forced myself to calm down. But I didn't sleep well. Every small noise made my heart jump. I kept thinking about that rustling, about how it had stopped the moment I looked. It felt deliberate, like something was testing me, watching me. When morning came, I was relieved. The sun pushed away the unease of the night, and I felt foolish for letting my mind get the better of me. I had planned to stay another night, but I decided to cut the trip short. Maybe I was being paranoid, but I didn't feel right staying out here alone any longer. I packed up quickly, keeping an eye on the tree line as I worked. I told myself I was just being cautious, but then I found something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. Not mine. Not boot prints. Bare feet. They were pressed into the soft earth near my campsite, just beyond where my flashlight had reached the night before. Someone had been standing there, watching me. I didn't hesitate. I threw the rest of my gear into my pack and started walking. Fast. I didn't care about the trail. I just needed to get out. Every few minutes, I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone stepping out from behind a tree. But I never did. I didn't stop until I was back at my car. I threw my pack in the back seat, locked the doors, and sat there for a long time, gripping the wheel with shaking hands. I never saw who it was, never heard anything more, but I knew they were there. I haven't been back since.